Thank you. Yeah, financial regulatory strategy. Broadly, my role is talking with regulators and with largely banks around the world about the challenges of implementation. And so trying to bring a bit of that perspective to the discussion today. Really want to thank you, Martin, for your, a very coherent kind of setting out the five priorities. I think that's hugely helpful in terms of, understanding where the Commission's going. I think the observations I wanted to focus on here are really to touch on a couple of observations on momentum in, global momentum in financial regulation, and what does that mean for the challenges in Europe and what's happening here. I think a little bit about Europe's role, and a little bit on some of the thinking we've been doing on kind of judging regulation going forwards. So just a few brief remarks, really. I think in terms of momentum globally, I think we're at a very interesting stage right now. The G20, I think, as everyone has realizes, is that it was set up to deal with financial crisis. The first leaders conference was all very much crisis-driven. The initial agendas were all about financial regulation. If you look at the agenda for the Brisbane Summit at this point, financial regulation is one of 10 priorities for the Leaders Summit. And a lot of the responsibilities have been, in some ways, delegated to the finance ministers and other bodies. There's a question of does it really capture the attention and the focus that goes with that attention around the world. And when I've traveled to Asia, you still hear a lot of pushback about, well, the financial crisis was kind of Europe and America's financial crisis, and a lot of thinking about, well, how much of the regulatory agenda that's been put forward in Europe and America are they going to adopt, and how quickly? So the G20 process, though, is the forum we have for doing that, and the marker that was put down by the chairman of the FSB around trying to solve too big to fail for this year, I think, is quite an important marker. Will they be able to declare victory at Brisbane? I've heard that there's a lot of rowing back from the declaring victory objective, but I think that setting that out as an objective has been incredibly helpful in focusing minds over the last year on how do the priorities of financial stability get implemented in different places around the world. So I've been getting a lot of calls from people in G20 members looking at kind of how do they implement the US and European type reforms in different markets. I had a call from one of my Indian colleagues just before we came into the session today. So I think that the discussions around GLAC, TLAC, MREL, how that works out, what gets agreed at for the Brisbane Summit, sends quite an important signal about where momentum is at the global level on regulation. I'm sure others this afternoon will have, or later on this morning, will have a lot more to say about that, so I'll kind of move off that particular part of the agenda. I think in terms of what needs to get done in Europe, I was encouraged by Martin's comments about the importance of implementation and finishing. I think that my observation from working with our clients at the firm is that implementation and consistency are really quite important for the industry to get their arms around things that they can be confident that they can implement without having to go back and redo again because the rules aren't quite ready yet. I think we need to look, though, then in terms of priorities for the future, it's kind of, where does risk squirt to when you clamp down on, and there's been quite a good job done in terms of focusing on all of the risks within the banking sector and the different approaches to managing those risks. Where does it go to? And as Martin said, one of the important areas is CCPs, and so I think it's quite important that that the focus in the next session for Europe is really around things like the CCPs. I think we then need to look at the consequences of kind of a long period of very low interest rates, growth and returns for people, and what does that drive? It tends to drive a search for returns. It'll drive innovation in places, not always in places that serve the interests of consumers. I think that in some markets, notably in the UK, we've seen a very heavy focus on conduct regulation at a time when Europe where the single market, the banking union has quite clearly and understandably been focused on prudential regulation. I think it'd be interesting to see over the next session where and how, beyond MiFID II, does conduct regulation get picked up in Europe? I think there's lots of interest globally in conduct regulation as well, although recognizing it tends to get implemented on a very national basis around the world because it affects consumers that way. I think the long period of low interest rates and growth, you wind up with poor pension provision for many people out there, and I think that's not unlinked to the need for a capital markets union. And so I'm very interested in the proposals that come out that are due out on the concept behind capital markets union and kind of how deep and how wide that it is intended to go. I think as well, was thinking about a lot of the changes that institutions are making, and there's a massive focus in the industry right now on data, on reporting data, on building structures for accumulating data, and a lot of this, driven by the need for transparency, understanding where financial risk is in the markets. I think that we will see a lot of opportunities presented by new technologies and all of the new data that's going to be available in, to participants in markets. And I think we see right now there's a focus on some of the issues around data privacy and security. I think that we will, in the future, I think we'll see a lot of innovation in financial markets around the data that's available. And we will probably need to keep a close eye on what risks are arising as a result of new participants and new players making new uses of all of the data that's out there.